business by day, wizard by night. You found the one place where the contracts end and the magic begins. Grab a potion, restore your mana, and pull up a chair. Welcome to the 8-Bit Tavern.
And welcome in. We appreciate you guys all joining us for episode 2 of the 8-Bit Tavern. We appreciate you guys coming back after our first episode last week. Thank you for coming back and sitting down with us again for today's episode for this week. We appreciate having you guys in here and hope that you enjoyed today as much, if not more, than you did our first episode. We're glad you guys came back. And yeah, so it's been a little bit of an interesting week for us. We've taken quite a hiatus from streaming. It has probably been, I'd say, at least a month since we have been live on Twitch, Kick, or YouTube, or as a matter of fact, any streaming service. We haven't really streamed in the last month. We've kind of taken a break, really tried to just get some of the joy back out of gaming. We were previously, trying just to spend time grinding on Call of Duty and things like that. And it just became kind of boring, to be quite honest about it. It's not something that I really looked forward to doing anymore as a streamer or even as just a casual game player. Really got burnt out on the Call of Duty thing. And so we recently picked up Arc Raiders. I'd say it's been a solid 2 or 2.5 weeks since we picked it up, and have really kind of fallen in love with that extraction shooter. It really takes us back to some of the things that we liked about some trial modes that they had in Call of Duty, like the DMZ mode, where you do have the AI, so you do have PvE, but you also have the PvP component to it, which just makes for an all-around interesting experience. Not only are you looking over your shoulder for the NPCs to attack you, but you are also looking over your shoulder for other raiders, in this case, or other players to try to kill you as you try to loot and extract and get your spoils. And so it's been very nice. It's been a wonderful switch up for us, and we're very happy. So, this episode is coming out to you guys on Thursday, and last night on Wednesday was actually the first time in that long period that we had actually been live. It was very nice to kind of get that feeling back into everything, and it was great. It was wonderful. Had a good evening, and we're excited to continue with our regular schedule of Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and Saturdays going forward. So it's been fun, it's very entertaining, and we very much so enjoy the experience and just the fun of being able to talk to other players. But in my experience, it's not quite as toxic or like profane environment like it is on Call of Duty. And everyone seems, for the most part, the folks that I've interacted with via proximity chat have been very mature, and it's been very nice. I haven't been called any slurs. I haven't had any profane words thrown at me as those things have gone on. And so it's just been very nice to be able to kind of just enjoy it and really get back into gaming for the enjoyment and not just to be doing something to be able to keep a stream going and to keep people entertained. So, as we mentioned last week, our big focus for this week's episode is going to be the Sony DRM kind of controversy that has taken place over the last couple of weeks and digital rights ownership. And, that's something that is only going to kind of evolve and change as we move forward in our digital world, as things go from being more physical and tangible to more of the intangible and digital aspect of everything. I know here where I live, you no longer even have to have a physical driver's license. You can have your ID done digitally through an app provided by the state, and that is just as valid as a hard copy driver's license for traffic stops or tobacco or alcohol purchases. Those that particular application is just as valid, and in a lot of cases is preferred by a lot of people because if an ID is lost, they don't have to go sit at the DMV or a title and licensing shop to get that renewed. And so I can only see as we move forward the topic of digital right ownership and things of that nature becoming all the more important as we look at how it's going to shape our future and things of that nature. So, just to kind of hit on a little bit of what exactly it is in case you've been under a rock for the past couple of weeks, or maybe you're just not in touch with that kind of thing because you don't do very many downloaded games and you still purchase physical copies of things. So, we're going to call this the 30-day ghost. Is digital ownership dead? So, the 30-day check-in controversy, so it was discovered in late April of 2026. Researchers and modders discovered a remaining timer on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 digital purchases. So essentially, newly purchased digital games now appear to require an online check in every 30 days. And if the console doesn't quote unquote call home to Sony servers within that window, the license is temporarily revoked and the game becomes unplayable until it is connected. Speculation suggests that it is an anti piracy measure to combat recent kernel exploits, but Sony has remained largely silent. Back in 23 and 24 was about the time that Sony almost deleted purchased Discovery TV shows because of licensing shifts. They then reversed it, and it proved that purchased is just a fancy word for rented. This is not Sony's first time having issues and controversies surrounding digital rights management. Just 3 short years ago, you had this issue with Discovery TV and them wanting to delete those essentially those digital licenses to stuff that people had bought, which would have made them have to incur that cost again. But they did reverse it at that time, and it just kind of goes to just remind us that in today's world, if you don't have something physically in your possession, do you really own it, or is it just a long-term, quote unquote, permanent rental? And what is permanent today? Permanent is just kind of a to end of life at this point, and or till the end of time in which a bigger corporation decides that you no longer have ownership to it. As we continue to look at areas in which these things have happened, Sony's not alone in this kind of stuff. Ubisoft had an issue with The Crew in which they delisted it and licenses were revoked entirely. It wasn't just stopping sales. Ubisoft actually pulled the licenses from users' libraries, making the game impossible to download or play. They can just pull the license and now you can't download it, you can't play it. Um, and it just kind of sucks for us, us folks that spend our hard-earned money on doing those things. And so, it's just one of those things where it just kind of just reminds us again that obviously nothing when it comes to anything digital is permanent. Since the initial controversy, Sony has kind of backpedaled, we'll say, on the issues with the 30-day check-in. They are now claiming that it is not a 30-day check-in, that it is a one-time check-in just to verify the license and to verify the ownership. I don't know why you would necessarily need to do a one-time check-in on a digital game because you're going to digitally check in when you purchase it. Therefore, the license should be permanent and should carry forward. But, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like what is the difference in the digital right controversy and the fact that often after several years these games that we love and play predominantly online, or they have predominantly online features that make the game the most enjoyable for the masses, they shut down the servers. In which case, now you may still own a physical copy of a game, but now your access to it and enjoyment level are much, much more limited and narrowed because the servers have been shut down. And so it's just one of those things, where it's going to continue to change as we move forward in the world. And it's probably quite literally only going to get worse. Um, and so it's just one of those things, we're just going to really, really have to take a look at that and kind of move forward. We're not like we were, 20 years ago, where everybody had a cartridge for a game and you popped it in a system. And as long as you purchased that game and you had that physical cartridge or disc in your possession, you had full access to it. We're much more connected in a digital environment now with online gaming and things like that, to where it's something that we're really going to have to look at. At what point are we going to see things like where your big, AAA studios are going to put time limits on your purchase? Yes, you paid $59.99 for this newest game that came out, but that only gives you access to, 100 hours of the game and things like that. Like, how is that going to affect it? When I stream, I use GE Force Now, and I get 100 hours for my 20 bucks a month. And if I want more than the 100 hours, I'm either at the free plan, which involves waiting in a queue, or I can buy additional time. But by that same token, I also then either have to do free to play games, or I have to purchase the game via Steam or some of the other publishing stores that are out there, like Epic and things of that nature. And so it just really kind of shows that the subscription and the having to continually purchase things, or purchase things to go in conjunction with the original thing, are not going to get any better. It's not gonna get any better. It's only probably going to get worse for us as we move forward. And so, what's gonna happen, um, to our games in, like, 20 years if these servers are gone? That's where your games are stored, I mean, yes, you technically have the game on the system and things like that, but for those that have that real online presence that is needed to play them, in 20 years, or if something massive happens to the servers, you've lost everything, hundreds of hours of time spent in whatever it is that you've been doing. And so I just kind of want to ask everybody, and kind of something to think about is, are we moving forward towards a subscription only world where ownership is just kind of a myth? And does it make physical media disc the only quote unquote safe way to play anymore? When this whole thing with Sony and the 30-day check in hit the news and everybody was starting to get upset with it, GameStop used it as a huge marketing thing for them. They went ahead and put out an advertisement offering tiered discounts for a certain number of game purchases. I believe the max was like 6+ games at 30% off of the pre-owned physical copies of games. And I'm sure that generated them a huge amount of business as they look to try to stay viable with physical copies in a more digital world. But it is one of those things where, like, I mean, everything is subscription based now, from the foods that you get to the games that you play to your online access. We now have, uh, at one point, iRobot was doing subscriptions for their very popular Roombas, where they sent you a Roomba and you paid a subscription and a monthly fee for it. And then if you didn't pay for that, for the month, then your billing didn't go through and payment wasn't made. They basically just disabled the vacuum. And now you are no longer able to vacuum your home with the robot until the subscription was reactivated. So it's just one of those things where, it just makes us wonder, as money gets tighter and people begin to look at not necessarily the bigger picture of what is the total cost of ownership. But as people just look at, especially the younger generation, who is already focused on trying to make what little bit of money they have stretch as far as they can, they're going to be more apt to want to do the subscription only and kind of get rid of the permanent ownership, one time cost of things, and really just go with, hey, I can afford 10 or 20 bucks a month for this item. I'm just going to do it on a subscription versus having to spend, 100 or $150 at one time to purchase and own it forever. The newer generation is more keen and more hip to that. Hey, it's only going to cost me $5 a month to be able to do this. And so I see that being something, in my mind's eye, I can see it being a thing where the subscription model just continues to grow. And, maybe this digital right ownership thing is not even something that people care about in the next 5 to 10 years, because we're just so accustomed to everything in our society being a subscription and having the ability for it to no longer be available to us, so that we can just go in, make that payment when we want to use it, and renew the subscription, have it for another 30 days or whatever. And it's just one of those times where, we just kind of have to take a look at everything and just brace ourselves for what's ahead and be prepared for how things are going to go. Having talked about the DRM thing, that's an exhausting and a very sad topic to talk about, as we think about the fact that we could have something that we paid good money for taken away from us. And it's just one of those things, it's just kinda where we're headed as a society, and I don't foresee it getting any better. I just see it getting worse. But, we're talking about Sony locking down your digital library today, but this isn't the first time a company has tried to gatekeep our fun. Back in '95, Earthbound would literally nuke your save file if it thought you hadn't paid your dues. But look at where we are now. The community kept that game alive when the servers, or in that case, the marketing failed. If you're playing Earthbound today, it's just a tried and true kind of reminder that, not all of our DRM efforts have to be bad. And so let's take a look at Earthbound and kind of talk about what Earthbound was about. Earthbound was set in Eagle Land, a parody of the 1990s America, in which you fought hippies, angry dogs, and sentient piles of puke with yo-yos. This game was a marketing disaster for Nintendo. Their ad campaign famously used the slogan, "This game stinks." It featured scratch and sniff stickers in magazines that actually smelled bad. The game bombed in the US, and for a decade, it was considered a dead franchise. So, kind of as a tie-in to our earlier DRM discussion, Earthbound had a legendary creative DRM long before the 30-day check-in. If this particular game detected that it had been pirated, It would increase the enemy spawn rate to make the game nearly impossible. And if you actually made it to the final boss, the game would freeze and delete your entire save file right before the ending. Because Nintendo wouldn't re release for years due to complex music licensing issues, because it samples everything from the Beatles to Chuck Berry. It survives solely through fan led preservation and emulation, and proves that when companies can't or won't provide access, the community will step in and they will do just that. Original physical copies with the box and the stinky player's guide now sell for well over $1,000. We appreciate you guys coming out and joining us again for episode 2 of the 8-Bit Tavern. I want to remind you guys that you can follow us on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, and Kick. Our handle on all of those platforms is T Magician 12. I appreciate you guys joining us. Again, I'm your host, T Magician. We appreciate having you guys here this week, and we will see you guys next week for episode number 3. As always, you guys be safe out there, and we will see you next week.